Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Christ the Redeemer Church and our 2022 Fall Theology Conference with Pastor C.R. Wiley. For those of you who weren't here last night, I'm going to go over the house rules again and the scheduling, just so everybody is aware. As you all probably have noticed on your way in, we do have coffee available. You're allowed to bring coffee in here, but you need to put a lid on it. We don't want any accidents on the floor, so put a lid on your coffee. In between our sessions, we'll have like 15 minutes or so to go out, get some snacks, fill up your coffee, talk about how awesome Wiley is and how amazing his talks are, and then make it back in. So that'll be that. For littler ones who are still in here, who might not be participating with the other children's activities, we have these bags in the back table that has some activities and stuff that might be of help to you. So please see that. And then we are asking that after our last session, if we could have a handful or 2, 3, 4 handfuls of men help set up tables and chairs for us outside for our fellowship event that we are having this afternoon into the evening, starting at 3 p.m. So we need to get set up for that. So we're looking for hands to help. So please don't just run away. Please help. All right. I think that may be the only announcements. Am I forgetting anything? No. I'm not forgetting anything. And I'm not going to forget to have us sing like I did last night. All right, so grab your hymnal, and you're going to turn to page 249, hymn 249. While you're doing that, please rise, and I'm going to pray, and then we'll sing. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you so much that we can gather together to learn about the household, how this central institution is so vitally important for the health of our societies and for the salvation of our souls. Please grant to us, Lord, the blessings of your grace today. Please be with Pastor C.R. Wiley as he speaks to us, and may his teachings go down into our soul and deep into our minds and conform us more into your image. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right, 249. Amen. Please be seated. Pastor C.R. Wiley, everyone.
Well, good morning. Great to see you again, and it looks like it's going to be a beautiful day. This morning, I'm going to be speaking to you 3 times. We're going to have questions and answer times following each of the presentations, and I believe also kind of a break to kind of stretch your legs and maybe get some coffee or whatever. So consequently, the talks are going to be, particularly the first 2, a little shorter to free up time for those other things. And then my last talk will be kind of to take us out will be on Tom Bombadil, because I think by that point you'll need to have something to kind of lift your spirits, you know. Anyway, as I've thought a little bit about you know, the world that we're in, I just kind of want to give you some background on me, just to kind of help you put things into context. So I'll talk a little more about my personal life before the second talk, but I want to talk to you a little bit about my intellectual journey right now before this talk. Really, the transformation in terms of my outlook, what did occur in a couple of phases. Maybe you know that I grew up in the Church of Scientology, but L. Ron Hubbard and all that kind of stuff was what my childhood consisted of. My father was an academic. My mother was something of a art lover, and we lived in the bohemian kind of environs surrounding college campuses. And my background is kind of oddly elitist. And but through the course of the me decade, we were on a tremendously rapid downward trajectory. You've heard of, upward mobility. We were in downward mobility mode. Scientology is very expensive. My father was pretty high up in it. He was in the Guardian, which is sort of what for a time was kind of their underground, kind of clandestine operation that got them in trouble with the United States government. But it's a creepy outfit. Everything you've heard about it is true. And L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction author who got a set of ideas that he decided to sell and became quite wealthy doing so. And a lot of people got drawn up into that. As I reflect on it, one of the things that has disturbed me about kind of the winsome approach, kind of the marketing approach to promoting the Christian faith, is it's a bait and switch approach that never switches. You're familiar with the bait and switch, right? You promise one thing and then you deliver something else at a later time. The Scientologists were really good at it. They would present you with this set of things that would lure you in, and then the next thing you know, literally, because they believed in reincarnation, still do, you've sold like 1 billion years of your lives away to the church in its service. But initially, they were drawing you in under a different set of pretenses or promises. And next thing you know, you're kind of wiped out. And that was the case in my situation. My father became sort of the black sheep. And so we went from being, I was baptized into the Episcopal Church, and the joke in Episcopal circles is whether high or low, the status is always quo. So, it's a place where, very well-connected and wealthy people, are involved. And so that was kind of the background, kind of the family background, life background. But I was awarded the state by the time I was 11 years old. Spent time in foster care. I was in a very different place at that point. That's when I was in Western Pennsylvania, and I was introduced to the Christian faith through a little blue-collar evangelical church. Everybody in Western Pennsylvania is kind of blue-collar, and it was a very different environment than the one I was used to. I was used to, Buddhas and beads and incense and stuff like that all around me, and artists and intellectuals, and now I find myself in a place where guys are working on their own cars and hunting, and I grew to really like those folks and respect them. And so I kind of think of myself as a kind of blue-collar intellectual, I guess, if maybe that's not pretentious. Maybe I'm not fully maybe qualified to be classified as either, but that's where my heart is. And so consequently, I've been a kind of a champion for the common sense that I saw in that blue-collar world. So I always had a sense that things in kind of elite culture in the United States have been moving in a bad direction for a long time. I was kind of part of that. That was my childhood. And then when I found myself at Harvard, I was surrounded by people who confirmed all my worst fears. There was a period of time in my life I was involved in urban ministry. I was I've joked that I'm really good with up and outers and down and outers because I've been kind of in both worlds. And by the way, they're not all that different. Up and outers are people who maybe went to prep schools in New England. I mean, it's super exclusive, extremely expensive schools. But they're basically abandoned by their families, just like people, on the other side of the spectrum, the down and outers. And so I remember I had a friend named Roger Dewey. He was the founder of an organization in Boston called Christians for Urban Justice. And then he went from that to being a chaplain at an exclusive prep school in New England. And I said, Roger, how did you make the switch? And he said, it's not that different. Everybody's on drugs. The kids never see their fathers. And the only difference is the money. That's it. When you got a lot of money and a lot of connections, you can be stupid for a long, long time. When you don't, you just hit bottom a lot quicker. And my church in Connecticut, before I came to Washington, I had down and outers and up and outers. That's kind of the folks that I was able to connect with. Anyway, so all of that is kind of in the when you think about me, that's putting me in context. That's kind of where I'm coming from. And when I was in Cambridge, there were some things that were just kind of bubbling to the surface. I remember there was a woman named Shirley Harvey. She was and is a Jamaican woman and had 5 kids, and she was really engaged in the public schools in Cambridge. And she came to me one day, I think in the early 90s, mid-90s, and she said, they won't let me refer to my husband anymore. I said, what? What's that about? They said, well, it makes all the lesbians feel bad. You might have noticed that this idea is spread. You're not allowed to refer to your natural relations in many environments today because it makes people who think about the world differently feel like, well, maybe you've got something they don't, and they don't like to think in those terms. And the thumb screws that we see being applied to people in all sorts of ways were just completely unanticipated by a lot of folks. But I'm not a genius, but I could see them coming. So just this morning, here's some news for you. Maybe you've heard this. Maybe this is brand new news for you. But PayPal just made a new user agreement that everybody had to sign on to if you're going to be with PayPal. But here's a guy named Miles, Ian Miles on Twitter. He said, PayPal's new acceptable use policy beginning November 3rd, 2022 will enable the company to withdraw $2,500 from your account if they find anything you've said to be objectionable, including misinformation or discrimination of groups or individuals based on gender identity. In other words, you could just go to PayPal and discover you've got, maybe because of this talk this morning, I could find that they've dipped into my funds at PayPal and said, okay, we didn't like what you had to say at that church, because we do live in a world right now where we don't need secret police. We volunteer information all the time, and it's all searchable. And if somebody has it in for you, they can find it. That's the world we live in. So the thumb screws are in development all over the place. I think the difference between the situation that we find ourselves kind of entering and maybe what we saw in the 1930s or in the teens with the Bolsheviks is basically we're much cleaner. We know how to apply the thumb screws in a way that looks a lot more civilized. They would just beat you to a pulp, lock you up. We've figured out ways to get at your stuff in a very sophisticated manner. So I'm writing a book right now on totalitarianism. It's entitled How to Defeat Communism in Your Spare Time, and I'm under the gun to get it done. That might not be the final title, but that's the working title. I'm hoping to have that into the publisher in February. But all of this in the background, one of the things that people ask me sometimes is, why did you get interested in the household? What was the impetus for that? It was basically I could see the train coming down the tracks, and it was heading right at us, and I thought, how are we going to resist? By the way, this is the resistance. We are the rebellion. They are the empire. They it's just amazing how they twist everything. They've got all the power, they control all the institutions, and they think they're the resistance. Just insane. We are the resistance. If you want to be radical, have a bunch of kids. Anyway, so I want to get into the subject of the morning, and that is the big picture. So last night, I tried to make an argument for the productive household and why we need to recover it. And now I want to talk about the larger context, the sort of the framework of meaning within which we are engaging in this work, because this is very countercultural and it's very difficult work. And we probably won't be able to see, things come to fruition in our lifetime that we'd like to see. So, with that in mind, my comments here are largely drawing on my book, The Household and the War for the Cosmos. So, let me begin. So, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness. That's Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. The household and the church are always under attack. You'll see why by the time I'm done, but in our time, the fighting has gotten more intense, and frankly, we're getting kicked around. We need to get back on the offense. And that's why I wrote a little book entitled The Household and the War for the Cosmos. And getting back into the fight is what this talk is about. So let's review a few things about households, particularly because some folks here this morning might not have been here last night. We live in a time when you can't do this too much. Just imagine a world without business corporations or social welfare agencies. Where do you suppose people made a living and got help when they needed it? In households, that's where. And that's the way things worked for the entire history of human civilization up until about 150 years ago. So, the reason that the household served this function is it was an economy. Household economies were based on some productive enterprise, usually farming or trade. Sometimes they were subsistence economies. Other times, they produced goods for the market. Either way, they were nearly the only industry. They produced food, clothing, and just about everything else. And on top of that, they were social welfare agencies, educating the young and caring for the elderly. The word economy is derived from two Greek words, oikos meaning house and nomos meaning law. An economy was the law of the house. It directed the members toward a common good. This means a household wasn't a building, it was an authority structure. That's why a father's authority in antiquity was unquestioned. People depended on him for so much, life without him was hard to imagine. He adjudicated household disputes in a world where the police were never a phone call away. He defended and enforced its boundaries, and he spoke for the household's interest in public forums. You might remember Mel Gibson's The Patriot. There's a really excellent, I think, picture of what I'm talking about there, here in that film. His job was to govern his household and represent it in the larger community. And a father was so important, his untimely death often led to breaking up a household and the distribution of its members to his relations. A father gave a household its vertical dimension, but verticality didn't begin and end with him. Fathers were subject to higher authorities. They were like the centurion that Jesus commended for saying, "I am a man under authority." You could say that they were the middle managers of the cosmos. So if you keep this kind of framework in mind, a father wasn't like the pinnacle. He was somewhere in the middle, actually toward the bottom of a very large authority structure. And this brings me to the most important duty of a father. He represented his household in a cosmic hierarchy. Heavenly laws were the basis of the home economy. This is where the feminists completely misrepresent the nature of the household prior to the Industrial Revolution, particularly the household as it was understood in antiquity. They are really good at begging the question. Begging the question is a rhetorical error, often performed intentionally, where you assume the truth of your beliefs and frame your arguments in a way that assumes them and makes another party just kind of have to work on your terms or argue on your terms. The first thing you do when you encounter that kind of thing is call it out. The thing that needs to be proven is the thing you're assuming. You're assuming that antiquity was just a power game and that men, because they were bigger than everybody else, just pushed everybody around. That's what you need to prove, and you can't. You just assume it based on some thinking by some 19th century atheists like Marx and Nietzsche. Anyway, you can see that gets me kind of stirred up. So he represented the household in the cosmic hierarchy. And the welfare of a household depended on the blessings of heaven. We see that in Job. So a father was embedded in a structure that he did not invent, and he had responsibilities that he did not choose. As you know, things at home are different today. Our households are not economies in the old sense. They're more like recreation centers. We've outsourced productive enterprise to the workplace. That's an interesting way to put it, right? In the workplace. And when it comes to family welfare, now the young, the old, the sick, and the out of the work all depend on social service agencies. And I've got a word to say about that because I've got a lot of personal experience with it. Imagine being raised by the Department of Motor Vehicles. That's what it means to be a ward of the state. Don't entertain the stupidity of the left. There is no replacement. I've seen it from the inside. And if you want to see abuse, it's there. And often they have people who are willing to cover up for them. The unexpected consequence of this has been a downgrade of a father's authority. Unexpected to everyone that isn't a Marxist. They saw it coming. In fact, Marx explicitly said so. But in our time, just what's a father supposed to be in charge of anyway? The remote control, what's for dinner, where we're going on vacation. What are we doing here? What are we up to? What are we trying to accomplish? What good are we serving? Of course, it just seems like it's just an arbitrary set of desires that are being served in some tyrannical father's household, because nobody knows what the household is for. Now, bringing this home, without a point of reference by which a father and a husband can be said to represent a higher authority, households are little more than networks of emotionally satisfying relationships. That's how they're all, presented and understood now. And marriage is now justified solely on that basis. So there was a really fascinating transition that occurred in the late 19th century, early 20th century, when sociologists saw how things were trending, and they were concerned that households were going to collapse because of the Industrial Revolution and all of the things I'm describing. So what they did is they said, perhaps we can see the household move from a productive enterprise to just a kind of set of companionate kind of dynamics. The reason why you want to be married is you're lonely, or you want to have some outlet for your sexual desires, things like that. And that's what it was kind of reduced to. A lot of people think that was like the story from the start. It wasn't. There are many places in the world today even where people have a much, I think, more capacious understanding of what households are about. So if you've ever seen, I'm going to throw out some films that I think are really useful to help you think about these things. If you've ever seen Fiddler on the Roof, great film. It's all about kind of a transition that's occurring in early sort of a modern, sort of modernizing sort of set of trends in a very conservative Russian Jewish community. And Tevier, he's got 5 daughters, and he's concerned about, helping them, get into good household situations themselves. And the whole film is about that, how this set of larger cultural forces is transforming the situation that he finds himself in. And there's that marvelous scene, or that song, Do You Love Me? So he asks his wife, because, his daughters are kind of caught up in this sort of the romantic, sort of emphasis of a lot of these trends. And he's like, wow, they're this is like really important. And then he thinks, well, what about me? Does my wife love me? And then he asks that song, do you love me? And then she just, for 39 years I did that. And she, yeah, I guess I love you. That's how it ends. But it's fun. It's a fun film. Another great film to kind of think about or use to sort of contrast, sort of the way things were with the way things are now is a film called Avalon. Elijah Wood is just a little boy in the film. It's about another Jewish family who comes to the United States, and they live in Baltimore. And I won't go into it in any depth, but in that film you see the transition that occurs with regard to how the elderly are cared for. So, in the film in the beginning, you've got 5 brothers, their wives, and their huge slew of children. They actually own an entire block of brownstones in Baltimore. It's like that block is theirs. They own that block. And they bring over the papa from the old country. And all the kids are excited, and they're all at the boat, and he's coming off the boat, and they've got their little flags, papa, papa. And he's like 4'7" or something like that. And all the little kids are like, I thought he would be bigger. Because, they talked about him so much and thought he was so important. But at the end of every day, he would just sit on the porch in front of one of the sons' homes, and all of the sons would walk up the porch and put a portion of their earnings from the day in a cup. And the thing they would brag about is, our papa never had to drink water. That was like, he never had to drink water. And they'd all laugh, because you just sit on the porch all day and drink vodka. Anyway, but then you contrast that with Sam, who's the oldest of the brothers, and at the end of the film, he's in a nursing home all by himself just watching television. Big difference. What have we lost? What have we lost? So, with those things in mind, when it comes to raising children, fatherhood has been repurposed, even fatherhood. Now, dad's a buddy. The goal of his friendship and nurture when it comes to the welfare of children is the happiness of the child. You've probably heard people say on television, I just want him, her, it, whatever, to be happy. Consequently, the idea that you are duty-bound to your family is now passé. Duty can't be reduced to emotionally satisfying relationships. Duty impresses a structured hierarchy onto your life. Duty never says, you do you. Or go ahead and do what makes you happy. Duty says, this is who you are. Do what is required. And I really think that a lot of people long to hear that. They want to be told, this is your duty. Duty, properly understood, is ennobling. Think about the military. Do your duty. It's the same in households. Do your duty. And when we see a person perform his or her duty with devotion, we admire that person, don't we? And we say, wow, his father is such a jerk, so difficult to be around, and yet he's there for him and helping to take care of him. And isn't that admirable? It's tough, but he does it. We admire people like that. Now, some people think that all the changes are for the better, that old-fashioned households have been replaced with an open floor plan with plenty of room for personal freedom. The people who think this way say that Christianity must adapt or die. There are 2 problems with that. First, the freedom that these people celebrate is an illusion. I'm related to a lot of these people. You probably are too. They're not as happy as they've been promised they would be. Many of them are tremendously miserable. And we need people to point things like that out. And we're more servile than ever because we're more vulnerable than ever. Our institutions are so large and we're so small. We're like little interchangeable cogs in vast machines. There's this thing. I have a lot of engineering friends. When I was in Connecticut, a number of people worked for United Technologies in our church, Pratt & Whitney and so forth, and they had this thing called standard work. Basically what they were trying to do is they were trying to make Pratt operate like McDonald's so that no one was irreplaceable. Everybody could be replaced because everything had been standardized to the point that no one was so important that you could live without them. Now, at one level, you might say, well, that kind of makes sense, but at another level, what's that imply? That you really are expendable. And what does that do for you? I mean, it gives you a sense of, well, anxiety. Maybe I'll show up one day and my desk won't be there. So the other problem is that historically the household, with its hierarchical structure and its roles and duties, was the center of the Christian faith. And in case you haven't guessed, I think that we need to bring back the old household in some form if we're going to get Christendom back, and I think Christendom was a good thing. And this isn't crazy, because I think there are at least two things we can do. First, we need to recover the productive household, and the way to do that is by taking back its old functions. So the modern state is endeavoring to supplant or replace household functions by taking them upon itself in the name of personal freedom. But if we just take those things back, make these programs and ways of doing things redundant, say, no thanks, don't need that, it puts us on a different footing. But the second way is we need to recover the larger frame of reference to build our houses in. We need to get back to the cosmos. Now, what is a cosmos, or what is the cosmos? When people hear the word cosmos today, they tend to use it as a synonym for universe. But the words don't actually convey the same idea. Universe stresses the singleness of reality, literally something that turns as a whole. That's what it means. And it's a fine word, even though we've forgotten what it means. Similarly, most people have no clue when it comes to the origin of the word cosmos. Let me give you an example of how this works. Very often in the New Testament, the word that's translated into the English word world is cosmos. So God so loved the cosmos that he gave his only begotten Son. Now think about, your impression of what the word cosmos means. You can see that it's not outer space. One of the reasons that people think in this way is pop science. You can see what I'm talking about by watching the old PBS television series, which was actually entitled Cosmos, or Cosmos. When I talk to the English, people from the United Kingdom, they Cosmos. But in America, we pronounce it the correct way. It's Cosmos. And I recall the sensation when the original broadcast was created. It was kind of a coming out party for celebrity scientist Carl Sagan. So you can go back and see the old episodes on YouTube, I think. But Sagan revealed the agenda that informed the series when he famously intoned in the introduction, "The cosmos is all that is or was or ever will be. Our feeblest contemplations of the cosmos stir us. There is a tingling in the spine, a catch in the voice, a faint sensation as if a distant memory of falling from a height. We know that we are approaching the greatest of mysteries." Now, that was a clever opening, and we should give Sagan credit, but we should also note that he plagiarized it. It's an echo of the words of Christ in the book of Revelation. "I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty." Sagan that wasn't a coincidence. He was intentionally inverting things when he did that. And also his reference to a distant memory as if falling from a great height is kind of redolent of Gnosticism, or the doctrine of amnesis, which is a Platonic understanding of memory. But anyway, we should also hear an echo of the Apostle Paul from Ephesians. Cosmos is the Greek word that he used in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4. You wouldn't know it, since we usually translate into the, as I noted earlier, the English word world. He chose us in him before the foundation of the world, the foundation of the cosmos. And that's a shame, because the word world doesn't have the same connotation as cosmos did in the first century. When we say world, we generally mean this place where we live, the earth. But we can be grateful that the English Standard Version does use the original word in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, where it takes the form of an adjective, cosmic. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness. So this brings me back to the origin of the word cosmos. In the first century, it was a way of seeing things that Christians and their pagan neighbors shared. Not even pagans saw the cosmos the way that Carl Sagan did. The cosmos was more than matter in motion for them. It was an ordered thing, the largest order of them all. And that's what the word actually meant. It included everything, even invisible things. And it also housed microcosms, little orders that depended upon the larger order. But there is something ironic about the way we use the word cosmos today, because in a real way, what we mean by it is almost the opposite of what it used to mean. When Sagan insisted that the cosmos is all there is, he explicitly rejected the ancient view that an order depended on an order giver. Instead, Sagan tried to explain how matter orders itself without the benefit of intelligence. This particular way of thinking is behind a lot of our tropes in popular culture. I wrote an article a few years back contrasting and comparing H.P. Lovecraft and C.S. Lewis. It's actually a thing that I'd like to develop into a book, kind of cultural apologetics. But if you're familiar with H.P. Lovecraft, he's considered the father of modern horror. People like Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, they kind of look at him as their father in the faith. And the faith is cosmic horror, that we find ourselves in a meaningless universe, and human civilization and human consciousness is a little bubble. And that when that bubble is punctured, we get a picture of the whole, the big picture, and we discover that we're small, insignificant, and we lead meaningless lives, and it drives us mad. That's cosmic horror. C.S. Lewis believed in cosmology, logos, the order of the logos. That's what cosmology means. Guess who the logos is, or the logos? Christ. That's what we see in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word. The word translated into the English word there is logos. In the beginning was the logos. And the logos was with God, and the logos was God. This is why it's helpful to know Greek. You can see how these things connect. But the word cosmology, like the word biology, like the word psychology, like the word sociology, they're all compound words that draw on the word logos. Logos is the order. And there's an order giver, and that order giver is Christ. In other words, the one who saved you on the cross is also the one who designed you, created you. Through him, all things came into being. Okay? So your Savior is also your Creator. We don't think in those terms. That's one of the reasons why we have such goofy eschatology. We just got to get out of here. That kind of thing. The world is irredeemable. Well, the one who made it died for it to redeem it. Right? That should radically affect the way you look at the future. We're actually on the winning team. We're at a dark moment in this particular story, but we're on the winning team. We're like going back to my point about the resistance or the rebellion. I mean, we're at the point in the story where Obi-Wan Kenobi is talking to Luke Skywalker about lightsabers. We're still pretty early in the story. There's a whole lot that is going to happen that we're not going to live to see, but we know we win because Christ rose from the dead. What does that mean in a practical way? Well, what that means is that the thumbscrew that the devil uses, that wickedness uses to get us to capitulate and comply, is powerless over us. I had a friend named Bruce Wall years ago. He was involved with the gang ministry in Boston, and he was threatened. His life was threatened many times, and his standard response was, "You can't threaten a man with heaven." Yeah. Okay, that's all you got? Anyway, so that's why we're on the winning side. But getting back to my presentation here, some people in the past believed that the cosmos took its present form through violent process. In their stories, the gods fought to impose an order on chaos. But in biblical cosmogony, there's a different way that things occur, and the important respects from other creation stories. For one thing, it's not a violent process, but proceeds in a much more workmanlike way. You can say this is kind of blue-collar theology when you look at creation. There's a very workmanlike way. It's not God as the warrior who is overcoming the forces of chaos and imposing an order violently. God is taking things and ordering them in a way that creates a structure and a hierarchy and an authority structure that exists whether we like it to or not. And Christians, when it came to the cosmos, the thing that's worth keeping in mind that even though there were different stories, Christians and their neighbors agreed that there was someone on top, seated in heavenly places, ordering things, and who was in charge. That was what they agreed on. So what that implies is verticality. Speaking of the heavens, the ancient cosmos always came with a top. Now, time for a little more politically incorrectness. Hierarchy is a good word. What it means, literally, is sacred order. Hieros for sacred, arche for order, arche. Even today, we know in our bones that an order must come with a top. Being high means you have oversight. It's what it means to be an overseer. You're higher in the hierarchy. And being low means looking up to your rulers, as when someone says of someone he admires, I really look up to him. But what about Sagan's cosmos? Sagan's cosmos doesn't come with a top. It has no normative vertical dimension whatsoever. It's just space as an outer space. Paradoxically, this means that Sagan's cosmos is flat, without any verticality. It's impossible to make meaningful distinctions or to say that some things are more important than other things. Sagan, who liked to wax poetic, was known for referring to his viewers as star stuff. Do you remember that? You are star stuff. But just why that should matter or flatter anyone remained unexplained. Rocks and frogs are star stuff too. He cheated a lot. These people always cheat. What you need to do is develop the ability to sort of have a discerning eye for where the rhetorical move is being made. They never call attention to it. They just make it and hope you don't notice. What this reveals is that the only way Sagan's cosmos can be given any charm at all is by sneaking a little of the old hot cosmos in here and there. According to the old way of seeing things, stars are a lot more than stuff. We see that when we read books like Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis. In that book, a youthful version of Sagan by the name of Eustace Clarence Scrubb, which is probably the greatest name in all of literature, remarks when he meets a star in person, in our world, a star is a huge ball of flaming gas. To this, the star replies, even in your world, my son, that is not what a star is, but only what it is made of. And we have all of this in Ephesians. We have heavenly places, several references to heavenly places. I could list them for you. By the way, one of the reasons I read my talks at conferences is because I want to make them available to people. So I don't actually preach like this. I don't preach from a manuscript. I often just teach extemporaneously. I just get them start talking. But one of the things that I like to be able to do is say, oh, you like that? Well, here's the manuscript. So I'll make them available, in PDF, and you guys can have them. So all of the biblical references are there. And we have regions below, a couple of references to those. And Christ has traveled the intervening span. We see that in chapter 4. But it is in the in-between space that should interest us for at least a couple of reasons. First, because it's a problem, and there are references to that. And second, it's because that's where we live. So there are problems where we live in the cosmos. But at our level, we are not the only occupants. Surrounding us are the principalities and powers. And we're not just talking about City Hall. Paul actually names their chief, the prince of the power of the air. Have you ever wondered about that? That term, or that title, prince of the power of the air? What it does is it reflects the hierarchy of the cosmos, and I'll explain why in a minute. No elected official that I know of actually goes by that name. Maybe they call him that. Maybe in the White House, the guy that's the occupant there now. Although some of them did act that way, obviously Nero, Caligula. What a greater moniker! But what a great moniker, though. The reference to air conveys a sense of being immersed, surrounded by a spirit that is as real and invisible as air, all around us. And the problem with this layer of the cosmos is that its prince is insubordinate. The layer that we live in is like a province ruled by an ambitious and tricky or wily governor. Now you know what the name Wiley means. People living in it don't necessarily know this, although they can feel the effects of the conflict. According to Paul, though, this layer of the cosmos will eventually be brought beneath the feet of Christ. Today, most Christians write off Paul's words about principalities and powers as though they were mere poetry or just referring to City Hall, if they think about them at all. Oddly, many Christians today even agree with Sagan that the cosmos is a meaningless place. One of the reasons why there's such an emphasis on interiority in the evangelical world is we can't see meaning outside our heads in the world. That's why, Jesus is Lord of my heart, but we don't have an ability to say Jesus just is Lord, actually seated at the right hand. Now, when you understand what the early church was thinking, you'd say, well, it's a both and. It's not like an either or, but we've lost the objective sort of cosmological dimensions of that confession. Now it's just, you're saved. Has Jesus become the Lord of your life? And we kind of leave it there. We don't think about, is Jesus the Lord of your business? The Lord of Pella, Ohio? Or not Ohio, this is Iowa. But you get my drift. So this is not acceptable because it downgrades the lordship of Christ and the nature of the cosmos, as I just said. When the light of Christ's glory appeared, it revealed to pagans that there really was nothing to the old gods. But Christ's glory so filled the empty spaces that the church moved in and grew. Christians cleaned house. Christianity was a capacious and vibrant place, and beneath its soaring heights, new things were built, things that had never been seen before, universities and hospitals, as well as the greatest civilization that the world had ever known. Now, it wasn't heaven on earth. That civilization had its faults, its sins, but on a scale of relative goods, it was the best that ever was, and I will go down to my grave defending that. It just was the best that ever was. The telescope didn't destroy that civilization. Atheism did that. That way of seeing that doesn't see. Atheists tell us that there is no intrinsic meaning to things because there is no God to give them the meaning. Some atheists are urbane, others were violent, and yet others popularized the new creed, but they all agreed in the end everything amounts to nothing. At first, fools rose in applause. There's nothing above, we can rise, but wiser fools know that no heaven means no up. There are no scale of values. Nothing is better than anything else. The only thing that matters is who wins, who's got the power. That's all it gets reduced to. So outer space swallows everything, but it's never full. Now we have philosophers that say things like, a boy is a pig, and a pig is a boy. Peter Singer teaches at Princeton. And consciousness itself offends our brightest lights. Here's Bertrand Russell in 1903, the man who wrote Why I'm Not a Christian. Quote, I have been merely oppressed by the weariness and tedium and vanity of things lately. Nothing stirs me. Nothing seems worth doing or worth having done. The only thing that I strongly feel worthwhile, the only thing I strongly feel worthwhile would be to murder as many people as possible. so as to diminish the amount of consciousness in the world. That was before the Bolshevik Revolution. Hundreds of millions have died because of this vacuity, this vacuous cosmos we live in. It's just the truth. We have the records. We have the people who ran things telling us things like that. That was what was on their minds. So I'd like to stop at this point. And I feel like we all need a breather. But before we do, is there anything that maybe folks would like me to get into a little bit more, ask about? Yeah.
You're going to tell us something about your conversion later.
Yeah, I'll make some time for that before my second talk. Get into that for sure. Anything else? If not, well, I guess we could take a little break, right? Anything you need to say?
Break. Yeah, you have 15 minutes. Sorry, let me get it. 15 minutes. And I'll probably ring the bell again to herd you back in. So think of questions to ask.
some rumors saying he didn't try very hard. Yeah, there's a guy, I think he works for Omaha, talks about being late to practice, receiving calls, stuff like that. All the staff begging him to tackle the block in the black room. I don't know if it's true or not, but it lines up with a lot of the issues that he's had under his tenure.
All right, if we could make our way back into the sanctuary, find our seats so we can get started for the second talk here. The ringing the bell was ineffective. Yeah, oh, there you go. I got Dave Ladwig cracking the whip. That's right. That's what I needed to do. All right, my enforcer back there. All right. Come on in. All right, you're going to grab your hymnals. And we're going to sing Psalm 122, which is found on page 235, hymn number 235. 235. And when you get there and find it, please stand. A and B. Two, three, five. Amen. Please be seated.
Well, I mentioned that I'd like to fill in some of the blanks maybe that are in your mind when it comes to where is this guy from and what's he about and how did he come to Christ. And I'm happy to talk about all those things. As I noted earlier, found myself in Western Pennsylvania, and I was awarded the state. And during that time, I was, like any young teenager, interested in just kind of having fun and being with my friends and things like that. One of my friends was a preacher's kid. And when you're a preacher's kid, you have to go to church a lot. So he had to go to church. And he wasn't a particularly pious kid, or anything like that. He was just a regular kid, just that his father was a pastor. And I found myself in church a lot because I was hanging out with him. And it was during that time that I got to meet, a lot of the folks I've noted, I admired and liked being around. And they had a positive effect on me, and they brought me into their homes. And I wasn't like the object of their sort of missionary efforts or their love. I was more just another kid who just happened to be in church and would find myself at different events in people's homes. And when I was in those homes, I got to see a world that was new to me at a personal level, but in another way familiar, because it had kind of been captured in images by Norman Rockwell and stuff. So it was as though I was introduced to a world that I kind of longed for and enjoyed being a part of, but had been utterly, separated from. That wasn't the world that I was part of. I think I noted, family who are academics, artists, people in the music industry. My wife's kind of the same. We kind of have this weird kind of background. So she's got famous relatives who are famous in the Christian world, and I've got famous relatives who are famous in the secular world. But we have this kind of similarity, in this certain respect. So within this environment, I overheard the gospel and came to believe it. I was actually when I was converted, I was in a foster home. And, I was young and stupid. Now I'm old and stupid. But I remember coming back to the foster home and saying, I was saved. I was saved. Now I just need to live the rest of my life and not sin. And I thought, and I'd be going to heaven. And learned within a day that wasn't going to work. So that was background. So when I was a teen, I wanted to be a comic book artist. And so after I was converted, that was still my dream, still wanted to do that. And I had been in art schools over the course of my life, in and out at different points. So because I was in this sort of artsy bohemian, so I've got relatives who are their work is on display at New York art galleries, that kind of thing. So that was kind of the world I was coming out of. So I was, kind of thinking about that as a real possibility. And I loved the comics, and I was never into DC and Marvel. That was too commercial for me. I was more into the European comics and stuff like that. But during that time, I really had the sense that I was called to the ministry, and I resisted it. Didn't want to do it. It felt like it was like giving up my dream and that kind of thing. And but eventually I capitulated and said, all right, I'll study for the ministry. And then I went to college, and then went on to my first seminary. And then when I was in seminary, the first one, there were three, I was in Kansas City, and one of my wife's uncles was a commercial contractor, steel and concrete construction, and I went to work for him. And that was where I went from being just a person who admired blue-collar people to actually doing blue-collar stuff. And after that, I was in a framing crew with a bunch of other seminary guys. We would go to class in the mornings in our pickup trucks, and then we'd get out of class, we'd go to the work sites. We were helping build track housing in former, places once beautiful farmland was being turned into subdivisions, in places like Olathe and so forth in the Kansas City area. So that's where I got kind of the skills that served me really well over the years. And anyway, that's kind of how that came about. And then, because of my background as a ward of the state and being, having lived in the housing projects and stuff like that, I thought, well, maybe I should be involved in urban ministry. In those days, they talked about inner city ministry because cities where poor people lived. Now they're places where rich people live. But back in those days, you remember the late 70s, like Escape from New York and films like that, where it was like, we're returning to those days. But in the late 70s, Times Square was just like blighted. It was just like this war zone, and then you had people who said, hey, cities are cool again, and a bunch of money was invested, and all the hip people went to live there. And now we're returning to kind of the way things were, places like San Francisco and New York, so forth. But anyway, so I was involved in urban ministry for about a decade. And so I've had kind of like two careers as a writer, so that I was like an early advocate of urban ministry. So even before Tim Keller, I was doing it. And I was involved in that kind of stuff. In fact, I knew Harvey Kahn, and Harvey Kahn was the guy who was the lead missiologist at Westminster, and I wrote for his journal, Urban Mission. And that was back in early 90s. And that was before Tim Keller was even anything on the radar. But so I was involved in that world and involved with poverty issues and stuff like that. And all the stuff that I was trying to do was kind of against the grain, because as a person who had actually been a ward of the state, I was not at all enamored with statist approaches. I was interested in other ways of thinking and taking care of things, and more sort of centered in congregations and churches. And so I did a lot of work with immigrant communities in Boston. So I worked a lot in the Haitian community and various, Dominican community and stuff like that. And that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed those years. But there was a point where I went to, I was also during those years I was teaching philosophy at Eastern Nazarene College, which is down in Quincy. And they wanted me to come on full time, and they wanted me to get my PhD. And that's why I was at Harvard. I was working toward that. And it was at that time that I looked into the abyss, and I said, I remember my first day at Harvard. This was a lot of fun. I remember walking through, and they had all of the, this was like 96. Yeah, 96. So I was walking through, how like when the first day of class, you got all these tables set up for all the extracurricular activities and the clubs and stuff like that. So I walk along, and there's the Sierra Club, and Earth First, and just all the, things that you'd expect to find. And then there's the evangelical, club, at Harvard. And, I walk up to the table, and oh, cool, we've got a club here. And there are like 6 names on one sheet of paper, people signing up. I go to the next table, it's the LGBT, they don't think they had all the letters yet, but they had 3 pages, front and back, names. And I said, Wiley, you're not in Kansas anymore. And it was just like total war every day, every class. And now how I got there was kind of fun. I was actually invited. Do folks remember Harvey Cox? Does that name ring a bell? Harvey Cox wrote a book entitled Secular City. He was kind of one of the Death of God theologian types in the 60s. Sold millions of copies, the book did. Anyway, he invited a number of people into class, and we had like three conservatives in a classroom of about 30 people, and it was just like total war. And he was like the referee. And afterwards, he came up to me and said, I'd like you to come to Harvard. I was like, cool. So that's how I ended up there. But it's just kind of a weird kind of way it all worked out. It wasn't like I wanted to go there or anything. It was just sort of like that was where the door opened when the folks at Eastern Nazarene said, we want you to come on full-time in the faculty, because I was just part-time. But we want you to get your PhD. That's why I went there. And then after my period of time there, and I just could kind of see where the world was moving, it's about that time, late 90s, where I started thinking about the things I'm talking about now. So I was like, I know what's coming. I can see the train coming. We're not ready. I could tell that, various denominations were just going to get completely blown away by what was coming. The denomination I was part of at the time, the Nazarenes, have experienced it. PCA is experiencing it right now. It seems like every denomination has its own way of going bad, and it has to do with the particulars of their theologies and their theological systems. So anyway, but the developments in literary theory really pulled the carpet out from beneath a lot of people who were really serious about Scripture. And that was kind of like, when I saw that coming, I said, it's inevitable. It's over. We need a new plan. And so I started thinking and praying, what is the plan? And I thought about my own escape strategy. What do I need to do? And that's when I started really diving into the real estate. I need to create my own golden parachute. I got to create my own escape route. And that's what I did, and that's what I did. And then I thought, well, I need to talk about this more and write about it. And here I am. So, well, I'd like to talk about the war for the cosmos now. The empty cosmos of the atheist has left us empty. But empty places don't stay empty. The cosmos is being repopulated. Jesus told a little story along this line in Matthew chapter 12. Quote, when the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places seeking rest, but finds none. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. So also will it be with this evil generation. The last state of things is worse than the first, or worse than the first. Let's think about that. Just because you can't see something doesn't mean it's not really there. The prince of the power of the air is as real as you are. But like air, you can't see him, but you can see the effects of his misrule. And the world is sinking into chaos. We must relearn to wage the peace. There are many paradoxes in the world, and one is the adage, if you want peace, prepare for war. The Romans understood this. Pax Romana dealt with the situation on the ground, and when it came to putting troops on the ground, they were tough to beat. The Jews tried and lost badly. The Roman war wagon pacified them by rolling right over them. There were a number of sort of confrontations between Jews and Romans. The Jews were expelled from Rome at least 3 times. The first BC was in, I think, 139 BC, kicked out. Next time they were kicked out, I think was like in 80, 19, maybe 80, 12. And then we're told in Acts chapter 18, under Claudius, they were kicked out. They kept getting kicked out because there were conflicting visions of the cosmos. And what the Jews did is they were promoting Judaism. So the Jewish faith at that time had a very strong missionary enterprise underway, and Jesus refers to it in the Gospels. But God-fearers, people who were not Jews, but had believed that the true God had worked in Israel, and the preaching of the Jews was something to attend to, and they came to believe, even if they didn't enter the covenant themselves. These God-fearers were the people who were most likely among Gentiles to respond to the gospel. So there was kind of like a pre-evangelism that was occurring throughout the empire as the Jews went about, proselytizing people. So I think in Philippi it is, when Paul and Silas show up, what are they accused of? Being Jews. These Jews are coming here and teaching us to do things that are unlawful for Romans, and then they get thrown in prison. But anyway, that's what's going on. The Republic, and this is, in the early days with the Roman Republic, what was revealed is that it was constitutionally incapable of keeping the peace over the vast territory it ruled. Standing armies were financed directly by their generals, and civil war had been practically inevitable. In the end, Augustus defeated his rivals, and from that point on, there was no going back to the old way of doing things. So that's the empire. So the empire, for many people, was a good thing. It brought peace to that part of the world because that part of the world had been embroiled in civil war for decades. Cities just destroyed as competing Roman armies fought for control of the Republic. So that was the situation on the ground. And from the perspective of the people, as I noted, this was a good thing. And the triumph of Augustus was celebrated in works of art. Among them, Gemma Augustae, which is a carving dating from the 2nd or 3rd decade of the 1st century AD, not long before Paul wrote Ephesians. And the gem shows Augustus seated in a heavenly place. We know it's a heavenly place because he's surrounded by the gods. We see Neptune and so forth all around him. He's seated on a divan, and he's making some proclamation. What does that imply? He is a god. He sits in heavenly places. And I hope you can see what this implies about the peace of Christ. Christians believe that Christ is Lord in the same way that Romans believed that Augustus was Lord. Christ made rebellious authorities submit, and that is why he is now seated in a heavenly place. And he also governs a capacious household where former enemies live together in peace. So these are the two visions in direct conflict with each other. Now, what does the waging the peace look like? Augustus commissioned Virgil, the greatest Latin poet of the time, to compose an epic that told the story of the founding of Rome and why it was destined to rule the world. It was called the Aeneid, and its protagonist was none other than the Trojan hero Aeneas. Romans believed that they were descended from the Trojans, who had fled Troy after it was destroyed in the Trojan War. That's one of those things that was like common knowledge in antiquity, but we've completely lost touch with it. I think most folks are unaware that that's how the Romans thought of themselves. They thought of themselves as the heirs of Aeneas. And consequently, when the Romans defeated the Greek city-states, it was like payback time. In their minds, they just didn't forget. And so, anyway. Now, the Jews had their own epic, and it's found in the Bible. And it begins with the story of Abraham. They also believed that they were the heirs of the world. So you have two competing houses, the house of Aeneas and the house of Abraham, both who believe they've been promised the world by the gods. That's the thing to keep in mind. Now, as you may have already perceived, the world isn't big enough for two heirs of the world. One is going to lose. But here's another similarity between the stories of Aeneas and Abraham. Both end with a marriage. So if you're familiar with the Aeneid, it's all kind of heading to a wedding day, and the same is true in Scripture, and I'll show you why in a minute. In the Aeneid, Aeneas wages war for a princess. When his warfare has ended, he will take his throne and reign with her. And Abraham's story ends in remarkably the same way, albeit he's not the one that wages a war for a queen. That's the job of his heir, the son of David. After he wins the greatest victory of all, he wins a bride. And the Bible ends with their wedding day in Revelation chapter 1, or not chapter 1, chapter 21, and they live happily ever after. And that brings us back to the household. The Christian household is more than an economy. If making a living were all there were to it, we might just as well let the modern economy replace it. I think there's a lot more that could be said about that and why the modern economy is a bad idea for a number of reasons, but let's just concede that if there's nothing more significant about household economies than just making a living, then perhaps the modern economy does that better. We get a glimpse of the more that is at stake in one of the most politically incorrect passages that Paul wrote, and that's Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 and 20 through 33. By the way, one of the things I've noticed is, if a passage of Scripture is politically incorrect, that means it's really important. So if it makes people squirm, if you don't hear it read in like seeker-sensitive churches, that means it's really important. And here's how it goes. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. It should sound like what I read yesterday from Colossians. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Now this next phrase is really significant, and I don't know if I've ever heard a pastor preach from it except me. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. But do you see it? The duties of husbands to wives and wives to husbands reflects a higher order. That order points to the end of the world. The nexus of a Christian household is the conjugal union of a husband and wife. In both Genesis and Ephesians, we're told that it makes them one flesh. Paul tells us that this is a mystery, meaning that it hides something, even as it reveals something. One flesh begins with the conjugal union. That's why it was once called consummating a marriage. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but I can remember when people still used it sometimes when I was a kid. But it's just the beginning. One flesh also refers to the natural issue of that union in children, but it goes even beyond that. It is a union of interests, of goods, in a common life. The legal term is joint tenancy. This means that what goes for one goes for the other. And Paul tells us that all of this applies to Christ and the church. What belongs to the church belongs to Christ, and what belongs to Christ belongs to the church, because they are one flesh. The new covenant helps us make this connection. Here's why. Because sinners are condemned to die, Christ died for his chosen bride. Because Christ was raised and glorified, the church is raised and glorified too. In the Reformed tradition, we call this double imputation. It's a form of moral accounting. But what it accounts for is the one flesh union of Christ and the church. I hope you see what this implies when it comes to the Christian household. It means, in a real way, the Christian household is a picture of the end of the world. What I mean is it shows us the purpose of the world. The cosmos, or the world of the cosmos. And it shows us what the new world, Cosmos 2.0, will look like. It is a sign that reads, this is the way the world will end. Not with a bang or even with a whimper, but with wedding bells. Now, what we're getting at with this mystery, let me just take a moment to dig into it a bit, is that the connection between the union of a man and a woman and the connection between Christ and the church are direct. In other words, one illustrates the other. One actually makes it, or provides us with the occasion for the other. If there was no Christ and church, there would be no husband and wife. So what we need to do is we need to reverse the normal way we think of things. Most of us have been trained to think like Sigmund Freud. We just project into the sky. It's as though, well, the Apostle Paul is like sitting around thinking, what can I use to illustrate this marvelous truth? Husband and wife. Oh, yeah, that'll work. No, that's not the way it worked for Paul. Paul wasn't like, I'll dream up some illustration that I can use in a sermon or something like that. No, he's saying the meaning of the world is found in the union of a husband and wife. The future of the world is right there and has always been there. And we didn't see it because it's a mystery. So a mystery, like when you think about a mystery, most of us think, Sherlock Holmes. Admit it, a mystery. that kind of thing. What does that mean? Well, it's a puzzle. We think, oh, it's a puzzle. We don't know the answer. And then Sherlock Holmes, does what Sherlock Holmes does, or you fill in the blank, whatever your favorite, kind of detective is. And then at the end, there's like, and the murderer is mystery solved. The puzzle has been solved. No more question as to what, happened. That's not the biblical understanding of mystery. In fact, the Greek word for mystery, mysterion, literally means something hidden in something else. So the word that we use or have kind of in our minds when we use the word sacrament, that's the Latin sort of equivalent to mysterion. So when you see the term mysterion used in Scripture, that's what people had in mind when they were thinking about the sacraments. With the sacraments, there is the grace of God somehow communicated to us mysteriously through them. And it's real. It's not just happening in our heads. It's not just like, just an arbitrary act where we're assigning a meaning to this, that kind of thing. It's a very modern way of thinking. That's not the ancient way of thinking. It's not the way Christians in the early church thought. Christians in the early church thought marriage is like a really huge deal. Really huge deal. It's the center of the world deal. And it's pointing to the end of the world all along. And so when Paul is doing this, when he's making this argument, he's talking about not only just the day-to-day sort of way to conduct yourself in a household, everybody having a role and these kinds of things, but your roles tie into something far larger than can appreciate on a daily basis. That means that how we regard each other and treat each other is supposed to reflect the end of the world. We're like a living illustration. So like when I was brought into these homes, when I was a kid who was just really confused and got into trouble a lot and just that kind of stuff, what appealed to me, I didn't really know. But I could say, there's something about this that's really good. They weren't perfect people. I mean, I can look back at things that, I could see that weren't really all that great, and they were human beings, right? But in some way, in a mysterious way, they were embodying something that I was looking for. So our homes, and that's one of the reasons why hospitality is really important when it comes to the Christian faith, bringing people into our homes and giving them a picture of the end of the world. Now, we might not say that. We might let's sit at the table. Do you realize that what you are witnessing is the end of the world? Wow. No, just eat your taco. Enjoy, yourself, that kind of thing. But so that's what I'm getting at. This is really significant stuff. We're engaged in something far more significant than I think we appreciate and realize. And this is why the sacrifices we make for each other in this whole thing is because it's about more than us. We might just feel exasperated by people in our family, that kind of thing. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, prevent, the abuse that sometimes occurs in households and stuff like that. Don't take me to mean that. But when things are working relatively well, there's something that can be seen that maybe we don't see on a day-to-day basis, but it's there. We're participating in something bigger than ourselves. And that's one of the reasons why the sacrifices are important. And one of the reasons why getting the household productive is important. It's not just about being independent. It's not just about having control over your income or, getting kids working on things. All that stuff's true. But it's even bigger than those things. So I want to reflect a little bit upon how to bring this about. And one of the terms I've coined is guerrilla piety. And I'm not talking about guerrillas in the jungles of Africa. I'm talking about, freedom fighters in the mountains of Pennsylvania, that kind of thing. There's a war going on, and you've been conscripted into it and given armor. We see that armor in chapter 6 of Ephesians. But like Christians in the empire, We are hopelessly overmatched on the ground. Now, think about the armor. You know, one of the things, remember J. Vernon McGee? Does anybody remember J. Vernon McGee? Yeah. Dearly beloved. You know, remember his kind of thing, you know? I remember one time he was talking about the armor of God. And I liked the guy. I'm not trying to make fun of him or anything, but I'm just presenting this as a contrast to, I think, a better way of thinking. So, I remember him saying, well, there was the Apostle Paul in prison. And he was thinking to himself, how do I illustrate the gospel? And he sees the armor on that centurion. And he said, the helmet of salvation. That's what, so he's kind of like doing that. I want to suggest that's actually, it's not like a side light. It's not like, oh, well, and let me just throw in a few things at the end as he gets to the end of Ephesians. But he's been kind of building to this. This is really kind of like the apex. This is not the, oh, and don't forget kind of stuff. I think we treat it as, oh, and don't forget, when we ought to think, we've been building to this moment. This is like really important. So the principalities continue to rage against the Lord of the cosmos, even though they've been defeated through the resurrection. Inhuman machinery menaces us today. Technology tracks us, and increasingly it manipulates us. Progressive multinational corporations standardize us. Mainstream media seeks to indoctrinate us. State-run education and healthcare make us ever more dependent on government largesse. All of these things and more are arrayed against us. Yet, in spite of all these things, Christ has already won. We wrestle with defeated enemies, and we have two strategies that can project remarkable influence in the world so long as they are microcosms of Christ's cosmic order. The first is the household of God. When Alexander the Great swept across the east, he left behind a trail of 70 cities, and guess what they were all named? That's right. Yep. What are we going to call it? This is like George Foreman. Name him George. I remember, I think George Foreman has like 8 sons all named George. The only thing that's different is his middle name. He says, I want them to know who their father is. But this is Alexander. He's like, I want you to know who conquered you. Alexander did. So he did that. So they all bore his name, except for one, which was named for his horse. Now, this was more than an ego trip, though. What these cities were intended to do was promote the Greek way of life in the regions of his conquests, and they did a really good job of that. They were model communities, gifts of the divine Alexander, intended to help enlighten his new subjects in Persia and Egypt and Israel. Now, the Israelites, of course, were not too crazy about this whole thing, and a lot of folks weren't. I saw a fascinating documentary on sort of the conquests of Alexander on PBS, and there are people like in Afghanistan who still resent the guy. It's like the Alexander. Oh. It's been 3,000 years. Get over it. But anyway. Now the churches that Paul planted throughout the Roman world performed the same function. In these houses, the stewards work to make sure that these communities put the benefit of Christ's rule on display for the principalities and powers. And by the way, Paul makes this point explicit in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10. He says, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God is made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. So at any given time on Sunday that you got people looking in, and it's not live stream, there are principalities and powers that are looking in. Hopefully, too, the principalities and powers of your local community. Now, it's important to keep these things in mind because when we turn the church into a water boy for secular culture in the name of relevance, we lose touch with our true standard. And there's something of a paradox to this. When the church chases the world, it loses it, but when the church chases heaven, it gains the world. C.S. Lewis said something to that effect. I think he said, if you pursue heaven, the world gets thrown in as a bonus. if you pursue the world, you lose heaven. So that's the first strategy. So what we're engaged in here is we are a kind of a resistance cell in one sense. We resist the rule of the principalities and powers which are in rebellion to the true king. But at the same time, we are kind of an advanced force occupying territory. We should think of ourselves not simply as a beleaguered group of people trying to just barely make it, but as the folks that those folks need to be afraid of. We are the vanguard of a new order, the true order. And the second stratagem is the household, and we've been talking about that. The household is the fulcrum of the world, and it gives us leverage. And the principalities know this, and that's why they're obsessed. They are really obsessed with breaking it down. All you need to do is read them to see how obsessed they are with us. They hate us viscerally, and they want to destroy us. Let's not pretend that we can just be friends. It's not going to happen. Now, you may wonder how your small stake could possibly threaten the powers that be. Just remember, a household ordered by the household code in Ephesians reflects the rule of Christ. And all things connect. And that little tune that your household sings carries. So fight the good fight, go home, build your house, and if you do it in the right way, you will give a world, or the world, a glimpse of things to come. There is nothing more terrifying to the principalities than this, because in the end, the principalities will bow and confess that Christ is Lord. So those are my thoughts. I hope they were encouraging, and I'm glad to, respond to any questions you have about any of it. Yeah, Michael.
No, I think
Okay.
I think they all just they're either completely blown away, or I've done a good job, and this is like, yeah, we know this.
That's right. Probably the second. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question. Do you think that we, probably being the modern church, have done a disservice to single people by downplaying the household's importance and not creating a vision in the household? And then B, how would you suggest singles fit into this paradigm?
Yeah, I think that households should be capacious enough to be home to single people, and I think that there is a calling that single people have. I do think that, the comments I made earlier about the Apostle Paul were intended to be ironic in character, but he really did have a certain set of things he could do that a person with responsibilities would not be free to do. But that was an exception, not the rule, and it's almost as though we've taken the exception and made it the rule. And so my thought is we need a corrective in the other direction, because we've seen that happen, like we saw, with the Reformation. So I think the Reformation was a legitimate corrective of certain practices that were really kind of weird that had kind of grown up along this line. Because at that time, there were people who proposed, through the monastic life, that you were actually closer to God, more pleasing to God. This was like plan A, and like the married life is plan B, kind of for the people who weren't spiritual enough to like do the really hard task of being a nun or a monk or whatever. That was nuts. And I think, Luther and his wife were, the kind of thing that we should see there. But I think, there are still people who are called to, serve the Lord without being, united to husband or wife. And I think that you need to, let those folks know that they're part of this household, the household of God, the church.
Touching on that, do you think that you mentioned last night that there are, back in the day, it was like 80-something% of people were all married by 30 or whatever. And now that's not the case today. And so, do you think that people who say like, "Oh, I'm a single, I'm meant to be celibate," but really it's just that they are just afraid of the responsibility and the duty of getting married and managing a household and all the things that comes with? Do you think that that's like a part that plays into the?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think there are other things to keep in mind too. I mean, we have a society at large that's kind of encouraging singleness and discouraging marriage, and that comes into play. So if a person, let's say a person has not been properly catechized or just doesn't have a background in the church, what do they think? Well, they probably think about the world largely the way the media encourages them to think. And what we're told, through the media is that it's really about them and their personal happiness, and so they pursue, self-created visions of their happiness, and everybody else is supposed to support them in that task. But the reason why that's even kind of plausible is because of the rise of the welfare state, and the offloading of so much of our lives onto it and to corporate, the mega corporations and stuff like that. Our ancestors live in a world without those things. And so people more or less said, well, I really need to do this to strengthen the community. So it was about more than my personal happiness. And the larger community really felt free to strongly encourage people to pursue marriage because it was in the interests of the health of the community to do so. Now, the world today still encourages certain things. This is another thing that we need to kind of realize. It's not as though it's entirely a free-for-all and people are just making things up as they go along. We have a lot of very powerful institutions in our society that have a vision for everybody, and they're really promoting it hard and punishing people who don't go along. So it's not as though once upon a time we had a bunch of benighted people that push people around, and today everybody's just doing what they want. No. Today we just have very sophisticated, very powerful institutions that know how to make it look like you are just doing what you want, but they're actually serving their interests. So, yeah, Shane.
Could you comment on the way that sort of the lordship of Jesus is being used by some to basically actually kind of flipping things on its head to be a way to tell people to be quiet in the public square? Like, if Jesus is your Lord, you would not say offensive things.
Yeah, that's right.
Not ruffle feathers.
Right.
Like, and talk, maybe about how I'd be interested in your thoughts on just how the phrase Jesus is Lord is brought up in your.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's really weird about all that is that I know a lot of people, have known a lot of people who disagree with me very strongly, and they have they don't care one bit about my feelings, and they're winning. Just let that sink in. I've never had somebody who is promoting, say, the sexual revolution say, I know this is really going to kind of, disturb you, Chris, but this is why you're wrong, and would you consider it? No, that's not how it actually comes, no, they just kind of march around and attack you, that kind of stuff. And they have zero filter. They'll call you every name. Now, am I saying that we should do the exact same in verse? No, but I am saying that we should just get over this thing about being winsome and liked and just tell the truth. Do it in a truthful way, but just tell the truth. And just let the chips fall where they will. Stop carrying water for these people. Yeah, Daryl.
If the church has an interest in stable and strong families, are there practical suggestions that you would have for the church and for families in terms of helping to create those conditions, especially if you're in places where there aren't very many functioning churches?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I don't know if... Yeah, I do think there's a symbiotic relationship between the household of God and our households. And generally, Christians who pursue, the thing I'm talking about here in total isolation can get really weird, and I've witnessed it. we need to have other households alongside our own to, help enrich each other, but also to hold each other accountable and that, those sorts of things. So I do think you need to have a community. If if you're on a desert island with just your wife and kids, that's one thing. But if you're if you should really either pursue helping to develop a church community in which your household is situated, that's going to be a help. Or in some cases, maybe go to someplace where that's happening, if you can, because I just don't think households can be healthy when they're utterly isolated. I think too that there are a lot of things that happen in the larger environment of the church where you have uncles and aunts and things like that. So parents love their kids, but are not going to be sufficient to help their kids in all ways at all times. There need to be spiritual aunts and uncles and grandpas and grandmas and stuff like that who are there. So I think those are some things. But then I think when it comes to the practical matter of getting a household established, what's involved with that, there are, I think, lessons we can learn from not only our ancestors, but even the way things are done in different parts of the world today even. I witnessed this when I was in Boston, for example. I saw a lot of interesting things going on in different ethnic communities where they had their own banking systems that would operate pretty much just within their ethnic communities to help get new businesses off the ground and different things like that. Support each other and hold each other accountable in those ways. Communities of women who were engaged in various things that they wanted to do. So I think there's this larger sort of thing that needs to be in place to help support how this works. So for example, I've got people in my church, my last church, and then another church that I served in New England, whose marriages were arranged. They were from India. Here's a fun story. I remember one time. So I was at this very diverse church in Boston. We had people from we had 5 congregations, and all the congregations were language-based. So we had a Haitian congregation, an Indian congregation, people from Kerala, they spoke Malayalam. And then we had Portuguese, and anyway, you get the drift. And then the English-speaking congregation had people from all over the world, mostly connected to the British Empire. So we had people from East India, the West Indies, that kind of thing. And I remember there were all these really white bread, kids from places like Pella, Iowa, who would come to Boston, for college, and they were just so thrilled to be in this very diverse environment, and they would volunteer to teach in Sunday schools. And we had this junior high girls Sunday school class made up entirely of Indian girls. And the girl that was assigned the class, she was given some curriculum on dating. And so she was from I think, upstate New York or something. And so she was teaching this class, and the girls would just giggle. They'd just look at, she'd say something, and they'd, hee, hee, hee. Finally, she gets to the end, do you have any questions? And there's one girl that just said, we already know who we're going to marry. These were girls who were all 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. Now you might think, oh, awful, awful. But I've known, people who were happily married whose marriages were arranged. And it wasn't like what you see in Fiddler on the Roof, some old woman who just delights in putting people together for bad reasons, You will marry him whether you want to or not, that kind of thing. That's not actually how it works. So I was fascinated because I actually did a family conference in India. And I was, how do you make this work? How does it actually work for you people? And they've got a very sophisticated approach, and it's kind of regional. Now, I'm not saying that we can do that or even we should try. I think we need to do something that's more appropriate to our setting. So I have a guy in my church. He's an entrepreneur. He's got a really rapidly growing business. Today he's got 8 kids, 9th on the way. He's a multimillionaire. When he was interested in finding a wife, he had been homeschooled. When he was interested in finding a wife, he created a national organization for homeschoolers It was like homeschooling, like alumni America or something like that. And there were like a few thousand people who were engaged, and that's where he went looking for a wife. So what do you do? Well, I created an organization and had thousands of girls involved, and I went and found my wife. Get creative. He dated her, and and now they're happily married. But I think we need to be creative in ways like that too. Maybe somebody will be inspired to start another, because he ended it after he found it. Well, I'm done. Goal achieved. You can all go home now. Well, I guess we should probably take another break.
All right, you have 15 minutes. I will ring the bell again. And I expect Pavlov's dogs this time, right? Just kidding. All right, go ahead. All right. Alrighty. Let's make our way back in. I can see, again, that my bell worked halfway this time. It's better. I think my bell's weak. Anybody wants to, contribute to the fund of getting the pastor a new bell, a manly bell, like a big gong or something, right? That's what we need. Yeah. I can, brother. Huh? Boom! Yeah. A Dirty Harry gun. That's what we need. That's Chris's other book that he's writing. Dirty Harry, the Christian version, right? The Christian interpretation of Dirty Harry. All right. Let us grab our hymnals. Turn to hymn 247. Now, this hymn is interesting. For those of you who are in my church, you already know this. We're singing Psalm 127. And if you look in there in your hymnal, you'll see that above the lines it says DEC. That's for the men. The men sing the DEC. And then where it says can, C-A-N, that's for the ladies to sing. And so it goes men, ladies, men, ladies, men, ladies. And then there's a couple full parts there on the second page. That's everybody sings the full, and then the men, ladies, and then we finish it out full with everybody. All right? So let us rise. And if you don't know the song and you just want to listen, that's perfectly fine as well. Amen. All right. Please be seated. This is our final lesson here. And then after our last lesson, we're going to have a couple more announcements to make and a final song to sing. So don't go fleeing out of here too quickly. All right.
So I want to talk about Tom Bombadil. And first question, how many of you have seen the films, the Lord of the Rings films? So, okay, good number of folks. How many of you have read the books? Roughly pretty close numbers. And how many of you have no clue what the Lord of the Rings is and just wish it would just go away? Yeah. That's right. Well, so I wrote a book on Tom Bombadil, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Before I get into it, I'd just like to reflect a little bit on why I did it. First of all, I've always loved Lord of the Rings, and Tolkien's work, generally speaking. I was introduced to it before I was a believer. So I've got, kind of a history with Lord of the Rings before I had a history in the church. And the books really captured my imagination, And through the course of my studies over the years, I've wondered, why is it? What was it about those books that were so capable of grasping my imagination? And I, when I was a kid and reading them, they were kind of still like things that only really nerdy people knew about, or they were not like mainstream at all. Today it's sort of like, how can you not know about it? But in those days, a lot of folks were like, what is that about? Hobbits, what's that stuff? So that contributed to my interest in the books, just the fact that I enjoyed the story so much. But also, and I think about my own life, I'm actually in a very good place today. I mean, I'm happy. My children are grown, got a loving wife, things are great. We're pretty well off, and I've got a lot of freedom. And we've gotten to a stage of life where all the kids are grown, and I don't have to care, for them in the way that I did in the past. And so my wife and I are at a stage of life where we can kind of be crazy again, and I can travel around a lot and do stuff like this. So it's a really good place to be. And I'd love to be able to see other people enjoy the stage of life that I'm in and find themselves with children and grandchildren that they actually like and respect and like being around. And I think that's huge. The books I've written, of course, are pointing to some things that I think are really important to help bring that about. But at the same time, I mean, they're dealing with some challenges and some realities that are discouraging and so forth. And so I wanted to write a book that talked about kind of like what it really looks like when things are working right in a household. And as I thought about that, I thought, well, Tom Bombadil and his wife Goldberry, they have a beautiful home in Lord of the Rings, and I've always admired the character and been puzzled by him. And I thought, well, there's more going on in the story with Tom Bombadil than people, I think, can appreciate. And I have an eye for some of it because of my education. So that's kind of the background. And I also wanted to just write a book that wasn't controversial, at least not in the ways that my books have been controversial. I just wanted to write a fun book that, people hopefully would enjoy no matter where they're coming from. So the title of my little talk now is In the House of Tom Bombadil. If you're familiar with Tom from The Lord of the Rings, I imagine that you're as puzzled by his inclusion in a conference on household economy as you were his presence in Tolkien's trilogy. What could the enigmatic and apparently ridiculous Tom possibly say to us? Hopefully you've read the trilogy and if you haven't, your knowledge, I'm pretty sure, is limited to the Lord of the Rings as Peter Jackson interpreted the story. And if that's the case, I'm afraid you're at a disadvantage when it comes to what follows, because Jackson didn't put him in the book or in the films. But you're also at a disadvantage when it comes to life, so go ahead and read the books. Actually, I'm glad that Jackson left Bombadil out of his films, since I won't have to clear away his residue from your minds before I begin, because I'm pretty sure that Jackson would have got Bombadil completely wrong. First, let's review. Lord of the Rings is about overcoming temptation. The occasion of the temptation is a powerful magic ring, which not incidentally resembles the ring of Gyges from Plato's Republic, insofar as both make the wearer invisible. I say not incidentally because Tolkien was a great scholar, and undoubtedly he knew that the ring of Gyges illustrated the wickedness of the human heart, and it actually does in Plato. But the ring of the Lord of the Rings is far more powerful than the one in the Republic. It is a product, or the product of Sauron, a supernatural being who may be the most powerful creature in Middle-earth. Like the rest of us, Sauron is hell-bent on dominating everything around him, but unlike you or me, he actually forged a ring to get the job done. His incantation toward that end is inscribed on the ring itself. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. The all here, I should say, refers to other rings. Here's the rest of the verses. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. Those rings were forged with several purposes in mind, but Sauron's ring was a gambit to control them, and in so doing bring the races of Middle-earth under his control. But his subtlety was detected, and war follows. At the end of that war, the ring was cut from his hand. Sadly, it was not destroyed at that point. Instead, it was eventually lost in a river. Then oddly, even providentially, after thousands of years, it finds its way into the hands of a small creature with very little interest in dominating anyone, a hobbit named Frodo. Frodo is advised by a wizard named Gandalf to take his faithful servant Samwise and go to Elrond, half-elven, the greatest lore master in Middle-earth, in order to determine what's to be done with the ring. Unfortunately, Gandalf is prevented from accompanying them, but 2 other hobbit friends join Frodo and Sam, and the 4 of them set out. But from the start, they are pursued by agents of Sauron. To escape pursuit, the hobbits enter a mysterious and very ancient forest, fittingly called the Old Forest. What happens then is reminiscent of the saying, out of the frying pan and into the fire, because the Old Forest, in the Old Forest, they come under the spell of a malevolent and very powerful willow tree known as Old Man Willow. The tree dominates the forest in a manner reminiscent of Sauron, and before long, 2 of the hobbits find themselves trapped inside the tree, and a third is nearly drowned by it. Now, concerning the forest and the willow, here's what we learn later. Quote, "The hearts of trees and their thoughts are often dark and strange, and filled with a hatred of things that go free upon the earth, gnawing, biting, breaking, hacking, burning, destroyers and usurpers. It was not called the Old Forest without reason, for it was indeed ancient, a survivor of vast forgotten woods. And in it there lived yet, aging no quicker than the hills, the fathers of trees, remembering times when they were lords. The countless years had filled them with pride and rooted wisdom and with malice. But none were more dangerous than the great willow. His heart was rotten, but his strength was green, and he was cunning and master of winds, and his song and thought ran through the woods on both sides of the river. His gray, thirsty spirit drew power out of the earth and spread like fine root threads in the ground, invisible twig fingers in the air, till it had under its dominion nearly all the trees of the forest. Fortunately for the hobbits, someone even more powerful than the old willow comes along in the nick of time. His name, if you haven't guessed it, is Tom Bombadil. We learn Tom's name because the fellow can't stop singing about himself. As he comes traipsing by, this is what the hobbits hear. Hey, dole, merry dole, ring-a-dong dillo. Ring along, hop along, fa-la, the willow. Tom, Bomb, jolly Tom, Tom Bombadillo. Hey, come, merry dole, dairy dole, my darling. Light goes the weather wind and the feathered starling. Dawn along Underhill, shining in the sunlight, waiting on the doorstep for the cold starlight. There my pretty lady is, river woman's daughter. Slender as a willow wand, clearer than the water. Old Tom Bombadil, water lilies bringing, comes home, hopping home again. Can you hear him singing? Hey, come, merry dole, dairy dole, and merry-o. Goldberry, goldberry, merry yellow berry-o. Poor old willow man, tuck your roots away. Tom's in a hurry now, evening will follow day. Tom's going home again, water lilies bringing. Hey, come, dairy dole, can you hear me singing? After this, Tom Bombadil emerges. Here's Tolkien's delightful description. Quote, there was another burst of song, and then suddenly, hopping and dancing along the path, there appeared above the reeds an old battered hat, with a tall crown and a long blue feather stuck in the band. With another hop and a bound, there came into view a man, or so it seemed. At any rate, he was too large and heavy for a hobbit, if not quite tall enough for one of the big people, although he made noise enough for one, stomping along with great yellow boots on his thick legs, charging through the grass and rushes like a cow going down to drink. He had a blue coat and a long brown beard. His eyes were bright and blue, and his face was as red as a ripe apple, but creased into 100 wrinkles of laughter. In his hands he carried a large leaf, as on a tray, a small pile of white water lilies. This is followed by a striking deliverance. After being told by Frodo and Sam that their friends are trapped inside the willow, Tom literally sings them free. You heard that right. He delivers them with nothing more than a song. After that, the capering and boisterous Tom invites the hobbits to his house, and then, without waiting for him, he bounds away out of sight. The bewildered hobbits trudge along after, and just as the sun is going down, making the way difficult to see, they spy Tom's house in the distance. A door opens, light streams out, and Tom's wife, Goldberry, a figure nearly as mysterious as Tom, sings them the rest of the way into the house. Then, she says, quote, "Come, dear folk," taking Frodo by the hand, "laugh and be merry. I am Goldberry, daughter of the river." Then lightly she passed them and closed the door. She turned her back to it with her white arms spread across it. "Let us shut out the night," she said, "for you are still afraid, perhaps, of mist and tree shadows and deep water and untamed things. Fear nothing, for tonight you are under the roof of Tom Bombadil." What follows is a delightful stay lasting 2 nights and a day. The house of Tom Bombadil proves to be a safe haven in a perilous land. So who is this guy? Who is Tom Bombadil? Fortunately for the reader, Frodo thinks to ask this very question to the people in the know. What they say is powerfully suggestive. Here's Frodo's question to Goldberry and her reply. "Fair lady," said Frodo, "tell me, if my asking does not seem foolish, who is Tom Bombadil?" "He is," said Goldberry, staying her swift movements and smiling. Frodo looked at her questioningly. "He is as you have seen him," she said in answer to his look. "He is master of wood, water, and hill." "Then all this strange land belongs to him?" "No, indeed," she answered, and her smile faded. "That would indeed be a burden," she added in a low voice as if to herself. "The trees and the grasses and all things growing or living in the land each belong to themselves. Tom Bombadil is the master. No one has ever caught old Tom walking in the forest, wading in the water, leaping on the hilltops under light and shadow. He has no fear. Tom Bombadil is master." A door opened, and in came Tom Bombadil. He had now no hat, and his thick brown hair was crowned with autumn leaves. So now you know where I got the idea for the cover of the book, because that's Tom with the autumn leaves as a crown. So Tom is master. As a sign, if you will, Tom appears with his forest crown. But Frodo wants to know more. So next day, after Tom has regaled the hobbits with remarkable stories, Frodo asked Tom directly, "Who are you, master?" And here is Tom's reply. "Hey, what?" said Tom, sitting up, his eyes glinting in the gloom. "Don't you know my name yet? That's the only answer. Tell me, who are you? Alone, yourself and nameless. But you are young, and I am old. Eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn." So Tom is the old master. Tom doesn't look like a master. He looks more like a jester. Goldberry says he's never been caught, and Tom says the same, and somehow that's relevant. In search of an explanation, my mind ran to virtue, particularly to self-control, the mastery of oneself. But Tom doesn't strike me as someone who's exercising self-control. There's no evidence even of a struggle. Instead, I see amusement, the sort of playfulness you get when fathers wrestle with toddlers, feigning effort and lots of laughter. I think something of that comes through when Tom asks Frodo to see Frodo's ring. "Show me the precious ring," he said suddenly in the midst of the story, and Frodo, to his own astonishment, drew out the chain from his pocket and, unfastening the ring, handed it over at once to Tom. It seemed to grow larger as it lay for a moment in his big brown-skinned hand. Then suddenly he put it to his eye and laughed. For a second, the hobbits had a vision, both comical and alarming, of his bright blue eye gleaming through the circle of gold. Then Tom put the ring around the end of his little finger and held it up to the candlelight. For a moment, the hobbits noticed nothing strange about this. Then they gasped. There was no sign of Tom disappearing. Tom laughed again, and then he spun the ring in the air, and it vanished in a flash. Frodo gave a cry, and Tom leaned forward and handed it back to him with a smile. What do we have here? Tom makes light of something Frodo will eventually find too heavy to bear. And Tom doesn't disappear. Instead, he makes the ring disappear. So does Tom's mastery extend even to the ring? Many theories have been suggested as to who or what Tom is, but no one can say for sure, maybe not even Tolkien. In this talk, I'm interested in entertaining a different question, a how question, as in, how come Tom can't be caught? Or, how is he the master when things belong each to themselves? And how is it possible for the light-hearted Tom to take Sauron's ring so lightly? In the course of their time in Tom's house, the hobbits learn that Tom knows many things. Quote, he told them many remarkable stories, sometimes half as if speaking to himself, sometimes looking at them suddenly with a bright blue eye under his deep brows. Often his voice would turn to song, and he would get out of his chair and dance about. He told them tales of bees and flowers, the ways of trees and the strange creatures of the forest, about evil things and good things, things friendly and things unfriendly, cruel things and kind things, and secrets hidden under brambles. He even knew the hobbits better than he let on. Quote, he appeared already to know much about them and all their families, and indeed to know much of all the history and doings of the Shire down from days hardly remembered among the hobbits themselves. End of quote. Lore, L-O-E, or L-O-R-E, I should say, is an old-fashioned word for knowledge, and I suspect that Tolkien preferred it to the word knowledge. Its root means furrow and track. It seems to imply that lore is something to follow, something that takes us somewhere, something to obey. On the face of it, knowledge of this kind looks like servitude, but paradoxically, it is the truth that makes you free. By contrast, for modern people, knowledge is power. Knowledge of this sort is believed to be amoral and free of moral encumbrances. But freeing knowledge from its morality is actually a kind of trap. Allow me to illustrate with another character in the story. In The Lord of the Rings, there is someone who seeks knowledge of this kind. His name is Saruman. And he's a wizard like Gandalf, but he's also a traitor. And as Gandalf shows when he recalls a conversation with him, quote, you have come, and that was all the purpose of my message, and here you will stay, Gandalf the Grey, and rest from your journeys. For I am Saruman the Wise, Saruman the Ringmaker, Saruman of many colors. I looked then and saw that his robes, which had seemed white, were not so, but were woven of all colors. And he moved, and if he moved, they shimmered and changed hues so that the eye was bewildered. I liked white better, I said. White, he sneered. It serves as a beginning. White cloth may be dyed. The white page may be overwritten. And the white light can be broken. In which case, it is no longer white, said I. And he that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom. You need not speak to me as to one of the fools that you take for friends, said he. I have not brought you hither to be instructed by you, but to give you a choice. He drew himself up then and began to declaim, as if he were making a speech long rehearsed. The elder days are gone, the middle days are passing, the younger days are beginning. The time of the elves is over, but Our time is at hand, the world of men, which we must rule, but we must have power, power to order all things as we will, for that good which only the wise can see. And listen, Gandalf, my old friend and helper, he said, coming near and speaking now in a softer voice. I said we, for we it may be, if you join with me. When Gandalf refuses the offer, Saruman changes his tone. I did not expect you to show wisdom even in your own behalf, but I gave you the chance of aiding me willingly and saving yourself much trouble and pain. The third choice is to stay here until the end. Until what end? Until you reveal to me where the one may be found. So Saruman breaks things to know them, and that includes people. Knowledge is power indeed. By the way, I'm pretty sure that Tolkien had Isaac Newton, and his experiments with optics and prisms in mind when he wrote that scene, breaking the white light. And this, by the way, is a very important episode in the history of the development of modern science. In antiquity, the idea that you would break something to know it was immoral. By contrast, Bombadil used his lore to free the hobbits and to stay free himself. What did Bombadil know that Saruman did not? Well, Gandalf points out the path or the furrow of wisdom. Bombadil's power doesn't come from good intentions. Its source is deeper than that. I believe it rises from what he knows. Now, how do I know? Well, I can't say for certain. It's just my educated guess, my hypothesis. But I believe there's evidence for my thesis. It was the singing that clued me in, Bombadil's silly nonsense singing, or so it seemed. Tolkien was a fussy writer, so when he makes an aside, we should pay attention. Here's the aside that I'm thinking about. Quote, suddenly, out of a long string of nonsense words, or so they seemed, the voice rose up loud and clear and burst into song. There's something about those songs. He saved the hobbits with one. And that got me thinking, where else is there singing in Tolkien? Oh, sure, lots of places. But what was the first place? In the Silmarillion, Tolkien's posthumously published legendarium that informed The Lord of the Rings, we're given the story of creation. And there we learn that music played a key role. Middle-earth is actually sung into being. Raw power isn't the basis of its order. Instead, the basis of order and of being itself is harmony. If you're not familiar with the Silmarillion, here's how the music is described in the first chapter. In the beginning, there was Eru, the One, who in Arda is called Iluvatar. And he made first the Ainur, the holy ones, that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made. And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music. And they sang before him, and he was glad. But for a long while they sang only each alone, or but a few together, while the rest hearkened, for each comprehended only that part of the mind of Iluvatar from which he came. And in understanding of their brethren, they grew but slowly, yet ever as they listened, they came to a deeper understanding and increased in unison and harmony. End of quote. What follows is a grand chorus, and as the song moves along, different themes run through it. But as the song is sung, a singer named Melkor introduces disharmony, and some near him join in the dissonance. What follows is a conflict that threatens to descend into chaos, but Iluvatar introduces a new theme, and then another, and saves the song, even enfolding the disharmony into it. When the music is complete, this follows. Then Iluvatar spoke, and he said, Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor. But that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar, those things that ye have sung I will show forth, that ye may see what ye have done. Iluvatar then reveals that the song has become the flesh and blood of a new world, the world in which The Lord of the Rings and every other story in Tolkien's legendarium is told. Today, many people rely on science to define reality. According to these folks, if science can't know something, there's nothing to know. But science can't even explain its own story scientifically. On the other hand, on its own terms, Christianity is the revelation of ultimate reality. And like Tolkien's Arda, according to the Christian faith, the world that we live in was made from the outside. In Christianity, if anything is unnecessary, it's the world. But what is necessary is the one who made it. Here's how the Apostle John put it in his introduction to his gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So like Christianity, in the Silmarillion, there is a fall into dissonance. Since our world has that in common with Tolkien's fictional world, perhaps Tolkien is saying something about the path of wisdom in our world with Tom Bombadil. Tom is master. Another way to put it is this: he exercises dominion in his domain. Dominion has gotten a lot of bad press. It's an odd thing in a way because without it, we wouldn't have many of the things that make life livable. The exercise of dominion, in some sense, is inevitable. After all, we must make a home for ourselves in the world. A domus, which is Latin for home. Domus, by the way, is the source of the words dominion, domination, domain, and of course, domestic. For Christians and Jews and anyone else who believes in the God of the Bible, human beings have been given this world in order to make a home out of it. Here's the pregnant passage from the book of Genesis. Quote, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." The Hebrew word that's translated dominion means something like skilled mastery. And that's definitely what we see when we look at Tom. But skilled mastery can be a problem, as we see with the Ring of Power. When we see the Ring of Power in action, we see something very different from Tom Bombadil. When it comes to the ring, we see skill used in a domineering way. One of the devilish things about knowledge today is that it's sued for divorce from wisdom. They're not even on speaking terms in many minds. Human wisdom was once based on a deeper wisdom written into the world, and it could only be acquired through dedicated and grateful study. But for many modern people, there is nothing to be grateful for because there is no one to thank. Instead of wisdom, many people are after the facts that they can use. This underlies much of what goes by the name science today. Perhaps surprisingly, Tolkien's good friend, or C.S. Lewis, actually saw a connection between this and magic. This is something from his book, The Abolition of Man. Quote, "There is something which unites magic and applied science, technology, while separating both from the wisdom of earlier ages. For the wise man of old, the cardinal problem had been how to conform the soul to reality. And the solution had been knowledge, self-discipline, and virtue. For magic and applied science alike, the problem is how to subdue reality to the wishes of men. The solution is a technique." And this is, by the way, what's behind transhumanism and the quest for AI. But that's another subject. What does this have to do with Tom Bombadil? I think quite a bit. The Lord of the Rings contains many things, but one of those things is an important distinction. Throughout the Lord of the Rings, the good professor, meaning Tolkien, is careful to distinguish dominion from domination. We need to learn how to distinguish them for ourselves because very often they are blended in unprincipled and tendentious ways. So here's my point in a nutshell. Tom is an image of what true dominion looks like. Is this really something that Tolkien had in mind when he wrote about Tom? Yes, I think so. At least in part. He could be very clear about his beliefs, especially in the context of anything he wrote on the subject of fairy tales. Take this, for instance, quote, "The love of fairy, is the love of love, a relationship toward all things, animate and inanimate, which includes love and respect and removes or modifies the spirit of possession and domination. Without it, even plain utility will in fact become less useful, or will turn to ruthlessness and lead only to mere power, ultimately destructive." I think we see that all around us. In the modern world, the quest for knowledge is premised on the belief that the natural world is nothing more than a vast machine. Since it is merely a machine, learning how it works entails disassembly, breaking things down into their constituent parts. Unfortunately for the things themselves, this is something of a downgrade from the ways they were once understood. Everything from trees to rivers to people. Nothing is exempt. Now, because they are just things, they can be reassembled in novel ways. Think of Frankenstein's monster here. All this is implicit in Saruman's attitude and behavior. He's a magician, in the sense C.S. Lewis so aptly described. In contrast, Gandalf spoke up for an older way of knowing, a way of knowing things without breaking them. In the old way of knowing, things are more than the sum of their parts. If you've heard that before, now you know what it refers to. So this is an old debate in Western thought. It goes back hundreds of years. Hopefully you can see the wisdom in this way of knowing. After all, you are more than the sum of your parts. You are not a machine. You are a human being with a name and an identity, and your will, which is your own. You have a human nature, something that can only be disassembled at the price of your life, your humanity. If you see the world the way Saruman does, you'll come to resemble a machine yourself. That's the way things work. Whatever you think is the final truth of things, that's what we conform to. In The Lord of the Rings, we're told that Saruman, quote, has a mind of metal and wheels, and he did not care for growing things, except as far as they serve him for the moment. It was Treebeard who said that. Now let's contrast this with Tom. Saruman set a trap for Gandalf, but Tom set the hobbits free from Old Man Willow. What this demonstrates isn't that Tom is good and Saruman isn't, but how two different understandings of knowledge work themselves out in different ways. One catches things to control them, including people, and another frees them in order to commune with them. Things belong to themselves. That's what Goldberry told us. And yet there is a master. Does that strike you as odd? Think of it this way. Tom's mastery is limited. He doesn't own things. He doesn't break them. Instead, he knows them in a very different way. Tom tells the hobbits, "Eldest, that's what I am. When you're old, you should know more than young folks. Since Tom is the oldest of all, he should know the most." With these things in mind, a question occurred to me. Is Tom old enough to remember the song of the Ainur? If so, perhaps he knows the songs that gave created things their natures. Adamic language. We're told in Genesis that the animals were brought to Adam so that he could name them. But how did he go about that? Did he just make up names arbitrarily, or did he base their names on something? By the way, this is a huge debate in linguistics. Linguistics, the contemporary understanding is that sounds and language are completely arbitrary, totally contingent upon historical factors and history. But the older understanding is that language in some sense taps into the natures of the things that are named. And that's actually what we see in Genesis. It's because Adam is observant that he gives the names. This is woman because she is flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. She should be called woman. So he makes an observation about her nature, what she is, and gives her a name. That's not how we think of names today. I'm the only person that can name myself. That's why you all have to go along with whatever I say I am. So all of this stuff, by the way, has deep roots. And that's why we can't address the illness of our society or the illnesses of our society in a superficial way. The superficial approaches aren't going to work. We have to go to the roots, the intellectual roots, the spiritual roots of these things, and it takes hard work because there are people who don't want to help you get to those roots. So, if the latter, it must in some way express the natures of the things named. With this in mind, it was once believed that recovering Adamic language might help restore the dominion that was lost when Adam and Eve were expelled from paradise. One hypothesis was that Hebrew might be Adamic in nature. After all, the Old Testament was written in it. Another theory was that all human languages are somehow adulterations of an original language, and philologists worked at trying to find that original language, but they didn't get very far in their quest because although they were able to identify families of languages and trace those to common ancestors. Indo-European is the classic example, the mother language of many European tongues, Finnish and Basque being notable exceptions. And by the way, Tolkien was a real scholar of the sort of the Finnish mythology and language. And I believe, and I talk about in the book, that that's where he got the idea for Goldberry. It was from the Finns. But philology proved to be a dead end when it came to distilling an original endemic language. But odd as it may sound, there was another way to get back to the original primordial language, and that way was mathematics. Now, how can math give us a language with which to exercise dominion? Here's Galileo explaining how. Quote, "Philosophy is written in this grand book, the universe, which stands continually open to our gaze. But the book cannot be understood unless one first learns to comprehend the language and read the letters in which it is composed. It is written in the language of mathematics, and its characters are triangles, circles, and other geometric figures without which it is humanly impossible to understand a single word of it. Without these, one wanders about a dark labyrinth." End of quote. The notion that you could use mathematics to understand the world may seem like a modern idea, but in fact it's a very, very old one. It is the way of the quadrivium, which is a branch of the liberal arts, and what this way was believed to lead you to may come as a surprise. Classical education was something the Inklings understood well. That honorary Inkling, Dorothy Sayers, actually wrote a book calling for its recovery, The Lost Tools of Learning. It consisted of 7 fields of study, broken down into 2 groups, the trivium for 3, which followed this progression, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And a second group, the quadrivium for 4, which followed another progression, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and get this, music. Now, I've ambled on for a while. I've talked about knowledge and wisdom, domination and dominion, and how natures are, and now natures and harmonies. I need to arrive at the point. Let's see if I can do that with Tom and Goldberry's household. A beautiful harmony can be sensed in Tom's house. We see it in the mundane routines of Tom and Goldberry. Even when Tom's not singing, his words have a lyrical quality, and Goldberry's movements as she lights candles or tends the table are as graceful as a dance. When they speak or move in concert, there seems to be music that only they can hear. Even though Tom and Goldberry seem to embody different themes, this is what we see when they set the table for the hobbits. Yet in some fashion they seem to weave a single dance, neither hindering the other, in and out of the room and round about the table, and with great speed, food and vessels and lights were all set in order. And once their preparations are complete, in a blink, without explanation or observation, they appear before the hobbits in formal wear, dressed for the evening meal. Then begins a jolly time, and before long the hobbits have apparently picked up the tune. After drinking what appears to be nothing more than water, the hobbits are singing merrily, as though singing was more natural than talking. more natural than talking. That's actually taken from the story. That's the way of putting it. It's a telling way of putting it. Here's a little inside information. In Tolkien's Legendarium, we learn that a little of the music of the Ainur can be heard in the waters of Middle-earth. We're told, quote, Ulmo govern the flowing of all waters and the course of all rivers, the replenishment of springs and distilling of rain and dew throughout the world. In the deep places he gives thought to music, great and terrible, and the echo thereof runs through all the veins of the earth. Nature's living in harmony is something that many of our ancestors would have recognized on sight, but which requires a word of explanation today. Tom and Goldberry's dance around the table, setting dishes and lighting candles, says something. Their movements are set within a world made with creative intent. They are participating in something grand, something larger than themselves. And the world we live in if the world, I should say, the world we live in is also a work of art, why can't we hear music ringing in our ears the way Tom and Goldberry seem to? Could it be, or could it have, something to do with how we perceive things? Are we even listening? Do we even want to? We live in a tone-deaf time, and we behave as though there is no natural order to harmonize with. Instead, like Saruman, we think that the world should just do what we tell it to do. Naturally, if that's all there is to it, then freedom is nothing more than doing what you want to do. And laws and customs can be boiled down to some people bossing other people around. The suspicion that this is all there is now runs so deep in our time that even marriage, as a happy harmony of a man and wife, has been lost. It has been deconstructed in the interest of liberation. And what we see in Tom and Goldberry is more the exception than the rule today. But if Tolkien is saying something true about our world with his imaginary world, then the music is still playing in our world, and what we need in our time is to have our hearing restored. When it came to Old Man Willow, the way Tom delivered the hobbits was by calling the tree back to its true nature. Quote, eat earth, dig deep, drink water, go to sleep. Bombadil is talking. Tom knew what things were made for. In philosophy, these are called formal and final causes. What they are and what they're destined for. And just like Saruman, many people don't like this because it means that they are not subject to their control. With this in mind, I think we can say that Bombadil's power doesn't come from breaking and remaking. It comes from agreeing. He knew the tunes. It's the power of Amen. So let it be. And the same can be true for us. God has given us a nature, human nature. We have been made in his image, but he has also given us natures in two keys, male and female. And we know those keys, and I should say when we know those keys, we can make beautiful music together, exercising dominion and making a home for ourselves in the world that we've been given. So learn the tune, sing your part, and let the world stand back and wonder as we sing harmoniously in our homes. So that's my thoughts. And there's a bunch of other stuff I talk about in the book, but anyway. Any questions about any of that? Well, I think we're hungry.
All right. Announcements. First off, a big round of applause for Chris Wiley. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate you coming out and sharing your wisdom with us this weekend. Second of all, will everybody who participated in helping the conference, all the ladies who baked, helped clean, or set things up, set up decorations. If you're in the crowd, stand up. If you're all in the back, then everybody turn around and look at them all in the back. There they all are. All right, give a round of applause. Thank you so much. Yes, there they are. Thank you so very much. You are all wonderful. We absolutely could not have done this without you. Ladies, we are so thankful, and in the spirit of the conference, all of your husbands could not live without you, right? And the church is much richer with you here. So we thank you so much for all of your work. When you do leave, don't forget your kids, right? They're in the back room, and then we're going to need some help moving chairs and things and tables outside. Anything else? Be back at 3 o'clock. That is when the festivities are going to begin. So we'll give you a couple hours to rest and relax and then come on back. All right. Is there anything else that I'm missing? Well, I know that, brother. I know. Thank you. Thank you. Because I did forget yesterday. All right. Let us sing. Grab your hymnal. Turn to hymn number 541. Mighty Lord, extend your kingdom. 541. Please rise. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord Jesus Christ.